Welcome to this unique version of the Daryl Runswick Composition Prize. I'm Dominic Murcott and I'm Head of Composition here at Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance. Well, when I say here, obviously I'm not here, I'm at home. I took over from Daryl Runswick in 2003 and he instigated this prize during his tenure. The event is usually a concert in an interesting venue. We've been at the National Portrait Gallery at the South Bank Centre. Last year we were at the Brunel Museum. This year we're actually hoping to do it at IKEA in Greenwich. Tonight's event is in the ether, by necessity, quite obviously. The brief for the composers was to write a piece for chamber orchestra plus theremin, which was invented almost exactly 100 years ago. We will have contributions from world-leading thereminist Lydia Kavina, who was taught by Lev Termin himself. We will also hear from conductor Gregory Rose, who is a great composer in his own right, and then from our adjudicator, composer and performer Lauren Redhead from Goldsmiths College. After each of the 6 pieces has been discussed, Lauren will then announce the winner. The finalists this year are Harry Weir, Christopher Charlton, Anders Waller, Asil Almukhanova, Mathieu Robert and Jan Stavuliak. And we're going to begin with Jan.
The section from the beginning, there's actually no problems. It is creating the atmosphere. Then there's a delay on. The bar 158, instead of indication antenna, I would write the highest possible pitch, because the antenna itself would cut the sound.
There are very interesting subtleties of colour and instrumentation in Idyll, with very clear articulation, a good variety of dynamics and changing shades. The middle section contains delicately changing rhythms and then some attractive changes of pace and colour towards the end. The ending is very much a question mark, with striking rhythms in the double bass.
What I liked about this piece, first of all, was the way that it built at the beginning, the slowly moving and climbing introduction. And I also thought that the ending was effective in that way as well. The kind of build-up of the instrumental texture, and then right at the end, that kind of echo or resonance of the idea that you've notated in terms of those much more fragile or kind of quieter and distant instrumental techniques. And I think that that would have been very effective live. There's a really imaginative use of different techniques and different ways of writing for instruments here that I really appreciated. And hearing that live might perhaps highlight if there were some issues of balance or perhaps issues of kind of hearing all of that detail within the ensemble at every point.
So that was a discussion of Idyll of Justice by Jan Stavuliak. The next piece is Confessions, Les Fleur du Mal by Mathieu Robert.
For example, in section B, it adds atmosphere of built-up tension. So this is like this. Then in sections C, D, and in section H, it plays the culmination melodic lines in tutti.
This piece opens quite tonally and then gradually squeezes towards a subtle stretching of the tonality, so that the listener is teased into a sense of unsettlement. There is a subtle, gradual mix of accidentals, and the piece is well paced and developed, with refined changes of texture.
While this was perhaps a more traditional approach to orchestration within the ensemble, I thought it was nevertheless a very effective use of orchestration, in particular thinking about the roles and the possibilities of the different instrumental combinations. I also thought the section that began at bar 65 was a really interesting change of pace and atmosphere, and that really effectively kind of created a different texture and a different kind of idea within the piece that was good to hear. In places there was also very exciting heterophonic texture that was created with different cross rhythms, and I enjoyed that as well. So there were different kind of aspects of the ensemble that came out in terms of their perhaps idiomatic usage as instrumental groupings. In general, I think that the kind of quite symphonic ending of this piece worked really well. So it was quite a dramatic ending, and it was one that rounded off the piece really, really well.
And the next piece is Foggy Introduction by Idyll of Justice.
The theremin parts in the beginning from letter A to letter E is mostly consisting of short notes and phrases that don't collect any particular character or line, but I guess they are doubling sections in the orchestra. But from the section I see more logic in the line, and there are nice glissandi that are combined with the glissandi in the orchestra.
Often in this piece, it is unclear to the performers whether to play staccato or legato in all parts of the ensemble. The wind semiquavers in bar 9 are almost impossible to perform at this speed. The composer should try to avoid some odd notation such as tied minims with the same note rather than using a semibreve, and also the use of F flat in the violins. There are interesting rhythms employed here, including many bars with a 7 pulse and a wide variety of contrasting dynamics. The theremin writing is constantly interesting. The piece had a nicely contrasting section at the end.
I liked the really bold introduction of this piece, and it really announces itself when it starts, and I think that came across really, really well. I also think that in this piece there were some really effective uses of the percussion section, which brought out lots of musical detail and a really wide variety of colour, and that instrument really came into its own in some parts of this piece. Also, I liked the kind of antiphonal use of the different instrumental sections. I thought that that was very effective, and it was like hearing the different perspectives of those instrumental sections on the material. I enjoyed that part of it. There's also a brief duet between the harp and percussion, and I thought that that was a nice moment. I really enjoyed that texture, and perhaps that was something that you could have brought out a little bit more. However, from bar 248 until the section Q, there's a sudden moment of stillness there. And what was interesting about that was that it was quite fleeting. And I wondered, is that something that perhaps you might want to think about developing more in the future? Is that something that needed to be part of the piece? Could it have moved more to the ending at Q, which was very effective? Or perhaps you could have developed that into a longer section, and the time limit was a problem there. So that was a little bit of a question that I had when I heard that material. It was just something that came for the first time and then it vanished. But nevertheless, I thought that that ending as well kind of reminded us of that very strong beginning, and that worked well as a compositional device.
And now it's Anders Waller's piece, Falling Objects.
The theremin part is various according to the structure of the piece. There are staccato short notes in the first section, which is a challenge for the thereminist. It requires good study and great control over his sound while he plays in the orchestra, and it's difficult to get not distracted by the orchestra sounds. So there's a great risk that many of the notes will not be quite accurate. The middle section, it has the solo. It's very appreciated. Beautiful melancholic melody. It's simple. It lets interpret different ways and upon to performer's wish.
The tempo marking here is impressively slow, crotchet at 40, which is a hard speed to handle and maintain, both as a composer and for the conductor. Some of the dynamics are questionable. For example, pizzicato strings enter with a very soft dynamic in bar 4 against a full band, including brass. Although the brass begins soft, we found in the workshop that we had to increase the string dynamic considerably to make the instruments audible. The thick textured polyphonic writing ends at bar 58 and is replaced by vibraphone and theremin duet, with a repeat from bar 62 going back from the end of bar 69. With the repeat, this is possibly too long a passage to sustain this very limited material, although it uses pleasantly simple language compared with the complex material of the opening section. The final section is similar to the first, with the same dynamic layering problem.
What I liked about the score was the image on the front, and I thought that was a really great way to introduce the piece in terms of the way that you had thought about it, and I was also interested to know that that was your image, so that was really helpful for me in terms of thinking about what you were trying to achieve. I think there was really interesting musical material and texture in this piece, and I really got the feeling that you were trying to do something different. I really liked within that the kind of angular shapes and the cross rhythms that you created, and I think that there is a real sense of movement and interaction between the parts, and of really trying to use the instrumental sections in an interesting way, and I was, quite taken by that. I also, though, wondered about the theremin in that section. I can definitely see how the theremin is working as a part of the ensemble, but I wonder if some of those staccato notes would be really effectively delivered by that instrument. And again, that's something that I probably would have really liked to hear live, to see how it was managed within the music itself. However, the theremin in the duet with the vibraphone seems like it would really work well, and the first section that comes in that way is a really quirky interlude, and then as a coda it seemed quite unexpected. So this to me was perhaps something that seemed a little bit experimental about the structure, and I enjoyed hearing the contrast between that section and the very kind of freely moving material that you wrote in the other sections.
The next piece is by Christopher Charlton and it's called The Movie Night Suite.
The theremin appearance here records the tradition of use this instrument in sci-fi and psychedelic films. The part is comfortable to play. It is holistic. It has strong character. I like the diminished fourth in this main theme.
There is good and interesting use of theremin, and the piece certainly has plenty of energy and contrast with quite limited material. There is an uneven use of phrasing marks and articulation throughout the piece, so that it's not always clear as to whether the fast notes are intended to play staccato or legato. For example, in bar 100 onwards, some instrumental parts have staccato marks and others playing similar material do not.
Again, I thought it was really interesting to read about your inspiration and why you wrote the music the way you did. And I liked reading about the idea of the B movie. So I didn't have any popcorn when I listened to it, but I did enjoy listening to it. And I can hear, of course, the allusions that you make to all sorts of well-known film scores and film tropes. And I think that shows that you do have a really deep knowledge of music in that area. So what came across to me was a really effective collage with some really interesting uses of pauses to change the pace and change the atmosphere of the music. And in places, I think that was quite effective. However, that's also something that I would have loved to have heard live, just to hear how the ensemble managed that and how they might have kind of treated those pauses and how they kind of brought those sections together. And there are also some nice moments, I think, in this piece where you're using string techniques or other instrumental techniques like in the harp to get specific effects, and that use of colour really came across well to me. Given the really evocative nature of the writing in this piece, I think I'd have liked to see some more maybe subtitles or descriptions in the score. So these could be in English, they don't have to be in Italian, and they could just describe perhaps the images that you're picturing or the atmosphere or the ideas that you want the musicians to have in their heads when they're performing. However, I also heard in this piece a real variety of style and pace and musical ideas that I really appreciated, and I think this really reflects your idea for the music as well. So well done.
And the final piece in the competition is Chromatic Aberrations by Harry Weir.
I find the melody very suitable to the theremin. It's comfortable to play. Of course, it needs be very precise with intonation, not very simple. However, the image, lyrical, nudging melody, it suits very well to the theremin sound and theremin's image.
There is a good sense of direction in the first section of Chromatic Aberration, with a real feeling of introduction. The composer has a fine feeling for space, with not feeling the need to fill the gaps, so that the material sounds uncluttered and interesting. There is subtle use of percussion, with plenty of variety between measured and free material.
This was another piece that I thought used orchestration in a really effective way. The very quiet opening was effective, and it was distinctive, and it introduced that delicate texture that returned throughout the music. And I thought there was a real sense of the instruments appearing and disappearing, which worked really, really well. Here you've got a very gestural musical language, and you've used that not just for each instrument but throughout the ensemble. And I think that shows me that you've thought really effectively about the instrumental sections, but not as kind of separate groupings, but rather how they interact with each other. And so this led to some very effective ideas that were also very varied during the piece. And then finally driving towards the section at the end, it also leads to an effective conclusion, but perhaps a feeling of a kind of journey away from that delicate beginning, and a kind of conclusion of the musical material as well. And I thought that communicated really, really well in the score. So the difficult part of this now is that I have to make a decision between these pieces, and it was very difficult for me to choose because, as I mentioned, every piece had, I think, a lot of good points, a lot of strong ideas, and I really enjoyed listening to all of them. Because it was so difficult, I would like to recommend an honourable mention as well as a winner, and hopefully that explains how difficult this decision was for me. So I'll start there. The honourable mention that I would like to make is Anders Waller. The reason for this choice is that within this piece I felt a real sense of trying to find something new and to experiment, and I really enjoyed how you created different textures in the ensemble and different contrasts of colour within the ensemble, and I think that this was very brave to do in a competition piece, because I really felt like you were trying out something new and you were really trying to communicate something in the music. However, I have been asked to choose a winner and I have come to a decision, and the piece that I have chosen is that by Harry Weir. So well done, Harry. What stood out to me was the way that this piece used the ensemble and thought about orchestration and orchestrated its gestures not only within different instrumental parts but across instrumental groupings, and that was the aspect of it that really, really stood out for me. So I thought this piece was really sensitively scored. I thought it was very sensitively written, and this just made it stand out for me that little bit more. So well done, Harry. I think that was a really fantastic piece, but also well done to all of you for all of your work and for what you've achieved in the music that you submitted to this competition. It's been a pleasure to hear and to look at all of these pieces.
So that's the end of the Daryl Runswick Composition Prize 2020. Congratulations to our winner, Harry Weir. I'd like to say a huge thank you to adjudicator Lauren Redhead, to conductor, or should I say virtual conductor, Gregory Rose, to thereminist Lydia Kavina, and also I'd like to say a big thank you to the staff who supported this project, and in particular Gwyn Pritchard. Thank you for watching, stay well, good night.